Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you as well to my honourable friend from Berwick-upon-Tweed for the opportunity to speak today. There can be no doubt surrounding the growth in relevance of the Armed Forces Covenant at this crucial time. At the end of combat operations or conventional combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've been at war in the public eye for some time, and we now have a critical time to get this right and put veterans' care on a sustainable footing, thereby ensuring that our veterans receive the very best levels of care, as is our duty. Over Christmas, I read this report from the Ministry of Defence into the Armed Forces Covenant and was heartened very much by much of what I read. It would, however, be disingenuous of me not to report what I have seen and felt, not only in Plymouth, but across this country, which in some cases is a little bit different from what is in the report. The Armed Forces Covenant's core principle is that no one should be disadvantaged as a result of service. However, the truth is servicemen and women are finding that support that they have come to rely upon within the military falls away when they become veterans. There is, if you like, a support cliff. There is clear evidence to support this. One example of many for you, the Shavas report by Professor Tim Brooks, focuses on the unique needs of those with complex musculoskeletal injuries who are being discharged from the MOD or Defence Medical Services to an NHS system which cannot entirely address their needs. We've heard a lot of examples today, and I don't wish to raise them. I want to make my comments more sort of holistic and more strategic about the military covenant. But it's worth the one that came out in the summer when we were in recess about Clive Smith, who served in Afghanistan, who found himself in the summer having to remortgage his house so that he can walk again. Whilst he was serving in the military, his prosthetics care gave him 4 years of freedom, but when he left, he found himself falling directly off this cliff. And fed up with feeling disadvantaged, Clive has reacted in the traditional army fashion by finding a solution in a trip to Australia for controversial treatment to directly fix sockets to his upper leg, so-called osseointegration. Now, libel funding has only just been approved for limited trials of this procedure to start in the UK, but Clive is fed up and his faith in the system has been lost. That he should feel this way after sacrificing so much for our nation is simply unacceptable. And if the covenant is working, we need to ask, why is this happening? There are plenty of examples like this, but as I've said, I want to keep my comments brief and with a more strategic and holistic view of the military covenant across the service community. And I will be as brief as I can as I try and highlight a couple of key issues that I think need attention. Of course.
Thank you
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. So just to pick up where I left off, I think we've heard a lot of examples today, and I think sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're unhelpful. But what I really wanted to focus on was sort of broad brush strategic views of the military covenant across the service community, not only my own, but speaking to the sort of plethora of friends of mine that remain in place and so on. And I'll try and be as brief as I can as I try and highlight a couple of key areas. A key problem with the corporate covenant in our large companies, and this has been identified in the report, which is great stuff. It's clear that there's an appetite among our chief executives, and I've seen this, and our business leaders to support efforts by the government to implement the corporate covenant. And that's really important. So we have that sort of big company sign in an agreement to this, to what we're trying to do. However, getting this information to the shop floor where it really matters, and that sort of interface between our servicemen and women and these bigger companies, and so that veterans receive the benefits associated with the military covenant, it is unfortunately another matter entirely. Like I say, this is in the report, and I want to add to it, not just repeat the report, but I do so because this was unfortunately raised 12 months ago as well, and little change can be seen. And this point, as I say, is really important, because if we make a very big public showing of signing up large companies to the covenant, but the reality and the effects of that are not felt within the armed forces and veterans community, this can increase the feeling of tokenism that can so often be associated, rightly or wrongly, with schemes such as this. And I will touch on this very briefly at the end of my comments. Another key area that really matters to our servicemen and women and veterans community is the financial disadvantage, which I know is an ongoing project within the MOD. However, it cannot be right that British Forces Post Office numbers are still not recognised by some companies meaning some service overseas personnel do not have 3 years continuous residence, for example, and this continues to cause real and significant problems when accessing certain financial products within this country. On another financial note, I note with interest in the report that some mobile phone companies are now allowing soldiers to pause their contracts as they complete service overseas. I would suggest this is a very moderate step and not really one to sort of hang our hat on. In my personal experience, I was able to do this as far back in 2007. And so whilst it's important that we recognise the small steps, these must be set in perspective against the challenge of ensuring that we meet the Prime Minister's commitments to no disadvantage due to military service. And for me, this strikes at the very heart of this challenge to implement the military covenant. There is no doubt, reading this report, that significant progress has been made. However, whilst some soldiers are required to look abroad and personally fund their recovery, whilst some soldiers still struggle to access the myriad of brilliant veteran service providers in the third sector, whilst only in the last 12 months have we really begun to see a slightly better transition of medical records from the military to civilian GPs, we must bear this report in context against the increasing demand and a narrowing timeframe in order to get this subject right as a government. There is also no doubt that the military covenant has been a step forward by the UK government in how we look after our servicemen and women, and I welcome that. However, without teeth, without enforcement, whilst expecting servicemen and women, all veterans, to enforce the spirit and will of the covenant themselves, in some areas of the country, it is unfortunately felt to be empty promises. To my mind, we are at a critical juncture in how we look after our servicemen and women and our veterans community in this country. Some have long spoken of the need to get this right, and many of us will remain forever indebted to some noble individuals who have stepped up and delivered veterans care in the charity sector simply because it needed to be done. However, if we are to put veterans care in the United Kingdom on a sustainable model, now is the time to actually deliver this. In 5 years' time, it will be too late, the problem will be too large, and the recent conflicts will be forgotten. How we look after our servicemen and women and their families is a mark of how professional and how seriously we take our military in some globally very unsettling times. Looking after those who have been prepared to sacrifice so much is a crucial and a full part of combat operations. It is of equal importance to the other parts. And when it comes to finance, this Prime Minister and this Chancellor have channelled millions into this sector. We owe it to them, to the country, to make sure this existing finance is sweated accordingly. But I also understand that we live in times of financial restraint, and this can be a common objection to reform. I would take this opportunity to remind the government that if we can afford to conduct operations abroad, we can afford to look after our people when they return. If we can't afford to look after those who do our bidding, we must not send them. It is that important. I will on Tuesday next week be reacting to a very important study by King's College London into the scale of the problem that we face in meeting our veterans' needs in this country today. I will on the back of that be releasing a report that I have written in partnership with others that calls for total reform of the way we look after veterans' care in this country, if we are to successfully meet this need, as is our duty. The aims of this reform are bold but simple. They seek to eradicate gaps in the veterans' care system that is currently practiced in the United Kingdom. They seek no fear or favour from any one of our brilliant charity sector service providers, or indeed this government, which has done more than any before it to get this right. They are simply an objective attempt to reconfigure the services around the user and to ensure the government plays its part in delivering what is a function of operations, looking after those who serve. So this report is encouraging, and it makes wide reference to what is going into the arena of military support. But this is critical. It fails to provide any meaningful statistical reference to the single most important measure of success, what our military community actually got out of it. No one seems to be tracking this against a common, easy-to-grasp metric. There is no user-focused data on what the beneficiary community think about what is on offer or what their more broader views are on the military covenant. I would conclude my remarks by asking the government to pay close attention to the report that is released on Tuesday by King's College London. It would be a good idea to work out how many men and women and their families got the fair second chance that Roosevelt referred to. when he said a man who is good enough to shed his blood for his country is good enough to be given a fair deal afterwards. I thank my honourable friend from Berwick-upon-Tweed for securing this debate today on this very important matter.
We now move on to the